Snow fell the way secrets do, softly at first, then all at once, until the world could not remember what it had been before. Elowen Hart had just dropped her last armful of firewood when the silence settled. Not the empty kind, but the full, humming quiet that comes when winter holds its breath. Her cottage stood at the edge of Bramblewick Hollow, lantern light glowing amber through the frost-laced windows, smoke stitching a gentle line into the indigo sky. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang the hour, slow, reverent, like it knew tonight mattered. She pressed her mittened palms together and laughed, a small sound that puffed white into the cold. "Christmas Eve," she murmured, tasting the words as if they were sugared almonds. Inside, warmth wrapped her like a shawl. The kettle sang. A pot of orange peels and cloves breathed sweetness into the air. Sprigs of rosemary hung to dry above the hearth, their green stubborn and brave against the season. Elowen shrugged out of her coat and shook snow from her hair, which fell in dark, unruly waves that smelled faintly of pine. This was her favorite hour, the one just before night fully claimed the day, when everything felt possible and nothing demanded to be hurried. She lit another candle and set it in the window, joining the others. Bramblewick had a tradition. On Christmas Eve, every home left a light burning, a promise to any wanderer that there would be soup on the stove and a chair by the fire. Elowen had never seen a stranger take them up on it, but she kept the promise all the same. Traditions were like bread starters. They lived only if you fed them. The bread, oh, she crossed to the counter, lifting the cloth from the rising loaf. Perfect. She pressed a thumb into the dough and watched it spring back, alive and eager. Tomorrow it would be sliced thick and eaten with honey butter, but tonight it was enough to know it would be there. Outside, the wind nudged the shutters, not unkindly, just checking. Elowen poured herself a mug of cider and carried it to the rocking chair by the hearth. The chair creaked in a way that felt conversational. She rocked and watched the firework dance of sparks, her thoughts drifting to the year behind her, the spring floods, the summer bees, the quiet autumn when the orchard finally yielded enough apples to share. She had done well, she thought, not in the way people wrote letters about, but in the way that left your hands tired and your heart steady. A knock came at the door. It was so unexpected that for a moment she thought she'd imagined it, some sound from the settling timbers or the fire's pop. Then it came again, gentle but certain, a rhythm with manners. Elowen stood, pulse quickening, not with fear but with curiosity. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the room. Through the glass pane she saw only snow and darkness and the halo of her own lantern. "Hello," she called, opening the door a careful inch. Cold rushed in, sharp and bright. And there on her threshold stood a man dusted white as if winter had claimed him for its own. His scarf was knitted in uneven stripes, the kind made by someone who loved you more than patterns. His eyes were a winter blue that crinkled when he smiled, and when he did, it felt like a hearth had been lit somewhere deep in Elowen's chest. "Good evening," he said, voice low and warm despite the cold. "I hope I'm not too late." She blinked, snowflakes gathered on his lashes. Somewhere a bell rang again. "For?" she asked. "For the light," he replied, glancing at the glowing window behind her. "I've been walking since dusk, and every path seems to lead here." Elowen hesitated only a breath before opening the door wide. "Then you'd better come in," she said. "You must be freezing." He stepped across the threshold, and the cottage seemed to sigh, as if it had been waiting. He stamped his boots and shrugged off his coat, revealing a wool sweater patched at the elbows. The scent of cold and pine followed him, threading with the orange and clove. "I'm Elowen," she offered, suddenly aware of the flush in her cheeks. "Jonah," he said, setting his gloves by the door. "Thank you." She handed him a mug, didn't even remember pouring it, and he wrapped his hands around it, eyes closing as he breathed in. "This," he said softly, "is exactly what Christmas is supposed to taste like." They sat by the fire, a careful distance at first, talking of small things. The snow, the hollow, the way the stars looked sharper in winter. Jonah told her he was a map maker, though he hadn't made a map in years. Elowen told him about her orchard and the stubborn pear tree that refused to bear fruit unless sung to. He laughed at that, a sound that fit easily into the room. Time slowed. The kettle cooled. Outside, the snow deepened, tucking the world in. When Jonah stood at last, glancing toward the dark window, Elowen felt a surprising tug of disappointment. "You're welcome to stay," she said quickly, before the thought could be weighed and found wanting. "The roads won't be kind tonight." He met her gaze, something thoughtful passing between them like the pause before a carol's refrain. "If you're certain," he said. She nodded. "I am." She fetched blankets from the chest at the foot of the bed, the ones quilted from old dresses and flour sacks. As she shook them out, a small bundle tumbled free, wrapped in brown paper and twine, forgotten until this very moment. Elowen froze, the firelight dancing over the parcel. Jonah tilted his head. "A present." Her breath caught, a smile blooming slow and astonished. "I don't remember wrapping it," she said, "but I suppose Christmas has a way of remembering for us." She turned the bundle over in her hands, heart beating a little faster, and just as she began to untie the twine, a sudden gust rattled the windows hard enough to make the candles flicker. And from somewhere beyond the hollow came the sound of bells, not from the church this time, but closer, moving, as if something long awaited was finally on its way. Elowen's fingers stilled on the twine. The bells came again, nearer now, threaded with the wind, their sound neither hurried nor loud but unmistakably intentional. Jonah straightened, brows lifting slightly, as if he too felt the pull of something just beyond the walls. "That's not the church," he said softly. "No," Elowen agreed. Her voice sounded hushed, as though the cottage itself were listening. "We only hear bells like that when the old road wakes up." Jonah turned to her. "The old road." She nodded, setting the parcel carefully on the table, suddenly reverent. "My grandmother used to say Bramblewick Hollow sits on a remembering place. Most days it's just a hollow, quiet, sleepy. But on certain nights, Christmas Eve especially, paths overlap." "Overlap," he repeated, not skeptically, curious. "Not roads you can see," Elowen said, "but the ones people once walked, the ones they hoped on." The bells faded into the distance, leaving the hush thicker than before. The fire popped, sending a spark spiraling upward. Elowen realized she was smiling, though her heart was beating faster now, not with fear, but with the feeling of standing at the edge of a story already in motion. "Well," she said briskly, reclaiming the moment, "blankets first. Mysteries are better faced warm." They laughed, the sound easing the tension like a stitch pulled through tight cloth. Jonah accepted a quilt and settled on the sofa while Elowen banked the fire and set a kettle back on the heat. Snow brushed steadily against the windows, soft as flour dusting a counter. When she returned to the table, the parcel waited patiently. "Would you like to open it?" Jonah asked. "Or is that something you save for morning?" "I don't think it would forgive me if I waited," she said, surprising herself with the certainty of it. She untied the twine. The paper fell away to reveal a small wooden box, smooth with age, its lid carved with stars and winding vines. Elowen inhaled sharply. "I haven't seen this in years," she whispered. Jonah leaned closer, respectful as though approaching something sacred. "What is it?" "My grandmother's music box," Elowen said. "I thought it lost when the roof leaked before I moved back. She used to wind it every Christmas Eve. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. The melody that spilled out was simple and lilting, like a lullaby remembered from childhood but never fully forgotten. It filled the cottage, curling around the beams, settling into the corners. The air seemed to warm further, though the fire hadn't changed. Jonah's breath caught. "That tune," he said slowly, "I know it." Elowen looked up. "You do." "My mother used to hum it when we traveled," he said. "She said it was an old walking song, for finding your way home." The music wove between them, a shared thread neither had known they held. Outside, the wind stilled, as if pausing to listen. Snowflakes hung suspended in the lantern light. When the song ended, neither spoke for a moment. Finally, Jonah cleared his throat. "You mentioned overlapping paths." "Yes," Elowen said. "Some folks believe that on nights like this, the world remembers its kinder versions of itself. Doors open that usually stay shut. People meet who were always meant to, just later than planned." He smiled, something tender and searching in his eyes. "That sounds like a map I'd like to make." She felt warmth bloom in her chest at the words, not the fluttery kind, but something deeper, steadier, like setting a stone into a foundation. They shared a quiet supper, soup thick with barley and root vegetables, bread sliced while still warm. Jonah insisted on helping wash the dishes, sleeves rolled, humming the melody from the box without realizing it. Elowen watched him from the stove, struck by how naturally he fit into the rhythm of the cottage, as if he'd learned it long ago. Later they sat again by the fire, quilts wrapped around their shoulders. Jonah produced a small notebook from his satchel, its pages worn soft. He showed her sketches, half-finished maps of places that didn't quite exist as they were drawn. Forests with names crossed out and rewritten. Rivers that looped back on themselves. "These are the places I never found," he admitted. "Or maybe the places that found me too early." Elowen traced a finger along one penciled line. "Or too late." He looked at her then, really looked, and the room seemed to tilt just slightly, like a compass needle finally settling. Outside, the bells rang once more, closer than before. This time Elowen stood. "I think," she said slowly, "we should step outside." Jonah didn't question her. He only nodded and reached for his coat. When Elowen opened the door, the night greeted them not with cold, but with a strange, luminous stillness. The snow had stopped falling. The hollow lay blanketed and bright, moonlight turning every drift into silver. And there, at the edge of the trees, where no road had been that morning, a path now waited, pressed smooth through the snow, lanterns glowing along its curve like held breath. Elowen's heart thudded, equal parts wonder and recognition. "That," she said softly, "has never appeared for me before." Jonah stepped beside her, his shoulder warm against hers. "Maybe," he replied, "it wasn't meant to, not until tonight." The lanterns flickered, inviting. Somewhere along the unseen way, a figure moved, or perhaps it was only shadow. Elowen tightened her grip on the quilt around her shoulders, feeling the quiet certainty of choice settle in her bones. "Well," she said, a smile tugging at her lips, "we can't very well leave a path unwalked on Christmas Eve." Together they took a single step forward, and the snow beneath their feet shimmered. And just beyond the lantern's glow, something ancient and kind began at last to stir. The moment their boots touched the path, the hollow seemed to lean closer. Not in threat, never that, but in attention. Trees bowed slightly beneath their snow-laden boughs as if listening in. The lanterns along the way brightened, their light warm and steady, casting halos that softened every shadow. Elowen felt it in her chest, the unmistakable sense of being recognized. She exhaled, a small laugh escaping her. "It's warmer here," she said. Jonah nodded. Paths like this often are. They remember footsteps. They walked slowly, careful not to rush the magic of it. The snow underfoot made no sound, as though the world had agreed to keep their secret. Elowen glanced back once. Her cottage still stood, windows glowing faithfully, smoke curling upward as if to say, "I will wait." The path curved gently and widened, revealing a clearing Elowen had never seen, though she had wandered these woods since childhood. At its center stood a great evergreen, taller and broader than any in the hollow, its branches heavy with snow and strung with lights that shimmered like captured starlight. "Oh," Elowen breathed. Jonah smiled, awe softening his features. "A gathering tree." She looked at him. "You know of them." "In stories," he said. "They appear where people once came together, to celebrate, to hope." At the base of the tree, a small crowd had formed, figures wrapped in cloaks and wool, their faces kind and familiar in ways Elowen couldn't immediately place. As they drew closer, recognition bloomed in her chest like a memory unfolding. Mrs. Thatch, who had taught her to knit. Old Rowan, whose laugh had echoed through the orchard every harvest. The baker from 3 winters past, gone too soon but smiling now, flour still dusting his sleeves. "There," Elowen's voice wavered. "Not gone," Jonah said gently, "just visiting the path." One of the figures stepped forward, a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that shone like candle flame. Elowen's breath caught. "Gran," she whispered. Her grandmother's smile was exactly as she remembered it, knowing, mischievous, endlessly kind. She reached out, and though her hand looked no different from any other when Elowen took it, warmth surged through her like a hearth newly lit. "I was wondering when you'd find it," her grandmother said. "Took your time, love." Elowen laughed through sudden tears. "I didn't know how." "You weren't meant to," Gran replied. "Not alone." Jonah stood a respectful distance away, hands tucked into his coat pockets, eyes bright with emotion he made no effort to hide. Gran glanced at him, then back at Elowen and hummed approvingly. "A mapmaker," Gran said, as if tasting the word. "Good, we've been short on those." Jonah blinked. "You know who I am." She winked. "We know who you're becoming." Music began to rise, not from any single source but from the air itself. Fiddles and soft drums, the rustle of voices lifted in song. The melody was the same one from the music box, fuller now, layered and rich. People moved, slow and easy, sharing food that appeared as if summoned by memory alone. Gingerbread still warm, apples shining with glaze, mugs of steaming cider. Elowen found herself laughing, drawn into conversations that felt both new and deeply familiar. She and Jonah sat together on a fallen log, knees brushing. At one point he pulled his notebook free and began to sketch the tree, the lanterns, the curve of the path. His pencil moved quickly, reverently. "I don't want to forget," he murmured. "You won't," Elowen said. "This kind of place doesn't let go easily." As the night deepened, the lights softened, the music slowed. Gran returned, pressing something small into Elowen's palm, a brass key, worn smooth with age. "For the things you haven't opened yet," she said, "and for the doors you'll choose to leave unlocked." Elowen closed her fingers around it, heart full to aching. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Gran smiled, already fading into lantern light. "Whenever you listen close enough." The gathering began to thin, figures drifting back toward paths only they could see. The evergreens' lights dimmed one by one until only the moon remained. Jonah stood beside Elowen, the quiet between them companionable and deep. "I think," he said slowly, "the path is changing." She looked down. Snow had begun to gather again, softening the edges of the way they'd come. "Yes," she said, "it always does." They walked back hand in hand, not speaking, letting the night settle around them. When the cottage came into view once more, its windows still glowing, Elowen felt both the comfort of return and the strange sweetness of having been elsewhere. Inside, the fire had burned low but steady. The music box sat open on the table, its lid catching the light just so. Elowen hung Jonah's coat by the door, noticing how natural the gesture felt. As they settled in for the night, fire coaxed higher, blankets shared, Jonah glanced toward the window, where snow now fell in earnest once more. "Tomorrow," he said thoughtfully, "I was meant to continue east." Elowen met his gaze, the key warm in her pocket, the echo of bells still humming in her bones. "And now?" she asked. He smiled, slow and hopeful. "Now I'm not so certain." The wind sighed against the shutters, and somewhere beneath the quiet, the old road listened. Patient, expectant. As Christmas Eve stretched on, unwilling yet to let them sleep. The night did not rush them. It never did on nights like this. Time seemed to loosen its grip, stretching soft and forgiving, like dough left to rise by a warm hearth. Elowen stirred the fire until it sighed and settled, then poured the last of the cider into 2 mugs. The spice had deepened, mellowed, like a memory that had found its proper shape. They sat side by side on the rug before the hearth, backs against the sofa, quilts pooled around their legs. Outside, the snow resumed its patient work, tucking the hollow in layer by layer. Jonah cradled his mug, gaze distant. "When I was younger," he said quietly, "I thought maps were about certainty, lines and names, proof that something existed because you could point to it." Elowen listened, the way she always had with her whole self. "But the older I got," he continued, "the more I realized the truest places refused to stay still. They shifted depending on who walked them. Some only appeared when you were ready. Others vanished if you tried too hard to hold them." He glanced at her then, eyes catching the firelight. "I stopped mapping for a while after I realized I couldn't draw the place I was actually looking for." Elowen thought of the key in her pocket, of the path that had waited until tonight, of a cottage that had learned the shape of her solitude and kept it gently. "Maybe," she said, "some places aren't meant to be drawn, just lived." Jonah smiled, something easing in his shoulders. "I think I'd like to try that." The clock on the mantel ticked past midnight unnoticed. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called low and soft. Elowen rose to set the mugs aside, then paused, struck by a sudden memory. "Wait," she said, "there's one more thing." She crossed to the chest at the foot of her bed and lifted the lid. Beneath folded linens and lavender sachets lay a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. She brought it back and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a book, handbound, its leather cover cracked with age. Jonah leaned forward, intrigued. "My grandmother's journal," Elowen explained. "She wrote in it every winter. Not daily things, no weather or chores, just moments she didn't want the world to forget." She opened it to a page near the middle. Pressed between the pages was a dried sprig of evergreen, still faintly fragrant. She believed memory was a kind of magic, Elowen said. That writing things down anchored them, made paths easier to find again. Jonah's voice was gentle. "May I?" She nodded, and he took the book with reverent hands. As he turned the pages, his expression softened, then stilled. "These entries," he said slowly, "they're not just memories." Elowen frowned. "What do you mean?" "They're coordinates," he said, tapping the page lightly. "Not of where things are, but when they matter most." She felt a shiver ripple through her, not of cold. Gran always said winter thinned the veil. Jonah looked up at her, wonder bright in his eyes. Elowen, this book could guide people back to places they thought they'd lost. She considered the lantern-lit path, the gathering tree, the way the hollow had breathed with them. "Or forward," she said. He smiled, "or forward." They sat quietly then, the fire burning low and steady. At some point, Jonah's hand found hers beneath the quilt, not tentative but unassuming, as though it had always belonged there. Elowen laced her fingers with his, feeling the simple rightness of it settle into her bones. Eventually, fatigue brushed against them, soft and insistent. Elowen showed Jonah the small guest room tucked beneath the eaves, its quilt patterned with stars. She left a candle burning on the nightstand, just as her grandmother had always done. "For good dreams," she said. Jonah hesitated at the threshold. "Elowen." "Yes." "Thank you," he said, "for the light, for the path, for letting me arrive." She smiled, warmth blooming behind her ribs. "You were always welcome." When she returned to her own bed, sleep came slowly but kindly. Dreams drifted in, of lanterns swinging in snow-softened woods, of maps redrawing themselves, of doors opening not with creaks but with recognition. Just before dawn, Elowen woke to a sound so gentle she thought it part of the dream at first. A knock. Not at the door, but somewhere deeper, softer, as if the cottage itself were being asked a question. She sat up, heart steady, and reached instinctively for the key in her pocket. Outside, the snow had stopped again, and beneath the hush of early morning the old road stirred. Not waking fully, not yet, but waiting, as it always did, for what would choose to walk it next. Elowen lay still, listening. The knock came again, not a sound so much as a feeling, like the moment before a thought fully forms. The cottage creaked softly, timbers settling as if clearing its throat. Dawn's first light pressed faintly against the curtains, pale and blue, hesitant to intrude. She swung her feet to the floor, the cold boards familiar and grounding. The key was warm in her palm, as though it had been waiting for her to wake. Carefully, she opened her bedroom door and padded down the narrow hall. Jonah's door remained closed, candle stub guttered low but steady beneath it. She smiled at the sight, something protective and fond stirring in her chest, then turned toward the front room. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing like banked stars. And there, where the hearth met the floor, something new rested. A door. Not a large one, no taller than Elowen's knee, its wood pale and smooth, fitted seamlessly into the stone as if it had always belonged there. A brass knob caught the firelight, etched with the same winding vines she had seen on the music box. Elowen's breath left her in a soft rush. "Well," she whispered, "that's new." She crouched, heart thrumming, not wildly but with purpose. The key in her hand tugged gently, as if recognizing an old companion. She held it up to the lock, hesitating just long enough to honor the moment. Gran's voice echoed in her memory. "Doors don't appear unless you're meant to decide something." Elowen steadied herself and turned the key. The door opened without a sound. Warmth spilled out, carrying the scent of baked apples and wood smoke and something green and alive beneath the snow. Beyond the threshold stretched a narrow passage, lit by lanterns hung low, their glass fogged as if from breath. Footsteps approached. Elowen straightened just as Jonah appeared beside her, hair rumpled, sweater half-buttoned, eyes bright with that familiar mix of wonder and careful attention. "I thought I was dreaming," he said quietly. "So did I," she replied, "but I don't think we are." They shared a look, one of those unspoken agreements that needs no ceremony, and then together they stepped through. The passage opened into a kitchen. Not Elowen's kitchen, though it bore a family resemblance. The same sturdy table, the same hooks for mugs and herbs, but the windows looked out onto a different morning entirely. Rolling hills dusted with snow, smoke curling from distant chimneys, figures moving in the distance, unhurried and purposeful. A woman stood at the counter, kneading dough with practiced hands. She hummed the walking song under her breath. Carefully, she opened her bedroom door and padded down the narrow hall. Jonah's door remained closed, candle stub guttered low but steady beneath it. She smiled at the sight, something protective and fond stirring in her chest, then turned toward the front room. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing like banked stars. And there, where the hearth met the floor, something new rested. A door. Not a large one, no taller than Elowen's knee, its wood pale and smooth, fitted seamlessly into the stone as if it had always belonged there. A brass knob caught the firelight, etched with the same winding vines she had seen on the music box. Elowen's breath left her in a soft rush. "Well," she whispered, "that's new." She crouched, heart thrumming, not wildly but with purpose. The key in her hand tugged gently, as if recognizing an old companion. She held it up to the lock, hesitating just long enough to honor the moment. Gran's voice echoed in her memory. "Doors don't appear unless you're meant to decide something." Elowen steadied herself and turned the key. The door opened without a sound. Warmth spilled out, carrying the scent of baked apples and wood smoke and something green and alive beneath the snow. Beyond the threshold stretched a narrow passage, lit by lanterns hung low, their glass fogged as if from breath. Footsteps approached. Elowen straightened just as Jonah appeared beside her, hair rumpled, sweater half-buttoned, eyes bright with that familiar mix of wonder and careful attention. "I thought I was dreaming," he said quietly. "So did I," she replied, "but I don't think we are." They shared a look, one of those unspoken agreements that needs no ceremony, and then together they stepped through. The passage opened into a kitchen. Not Elowen's kitchen, though it bore a family resemblance. The same sturdy table, the same hooks for mugs and herbs, but the windows looked out onto a different morning entirely. Rolling hills dusted with snow, smoke curling from distant chimneys, figures moving in the distance, unhurried and purposeful. A woman stood at the counter, kneading dough with practiced hands. She hummed the walking song under her breath. When she turned, Elowen recognized her instantly, not from memory but from something older, deeper. "You look like her," Elowen said softly. The woman smiled. "And you look like me." Jonah's breath caught. "An anchor," he murmured, "a hearthkeeper." The woman laughed gently. "Names change, work doesn't." She wiped her hands on her apron and poured 3 cups of tea, setting them on the table as though this were the most ordinary thing in the world. Elowen felt herself relax into the chair, the warmth soaking into her bones. "This place exists between moments," the woman said. "It gathers what might otherwise be lost. People pass through when they're deciding whether to stay or go or become." Elowen glanced at Jonah, then back, and the door appeared because you're ready to tend more than just one hearth, the woman replied. "But readiness doesn't mean certainty." Jonah leaned forward. "What happens if she chooses wrong?" The woman met his gaze, kind but unwavering. "There is no wrong, only different kinds of work." The room filled with quiet again, thick and thoughtful. Outside the window, bells rang faintly, not summoning, not warning, simply marking time. After a while, the woman stood. "You won't stay long," she said. "This door closes with the morning." Elowen rose too, 1,000 questions crowding her tongue. But before she could speak, the woman pressed something into her hand, a seed, dark and glossy. "Plant this where you feel most at home," she said. "Not where you are safe, where you are true." The passage shimmered, lanterns dimming one by one. Back in the cottage, the small door was gone. Only the hearth remained, stones warm and ordinary once more. Morning light now filled the room, pale gold and gentle. Jonah exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, smiling a little, "that complicates things." Elowen laughed, the sound bright and grounding. "Christmas usually does." Outside, the hollow stirred awake. Somewhere beneath the snow, roots shifted, and deep within the remembering place, paths waited, patient still, for the choices that had not yet been spoken aloud. Morning arrived the way a good guest does, quietly, with warmth, and no expectation of being entertained. Sunlight spilled across the cottage floor in wide, honey-colored bands. The frost on the windows had softened into lace, and outside, Bramblewick Hollow stretched and sighed beneath its blanket of snow. Smoke rose from chimneys one by one, each plume a small declaration of life continuing. Elowen stood at the window for a long moment, seed cradled in her palm. It was heavier than it looked, as if it carried not just possibility but responsibility. She could feel it, a subtle thrum, like a heartbeat learned rather than born. Behind her, Jonah moved about the kitchen with an ease that still surprised her. He had found the bread, of course he had, and sliced it thick, setting it to toast near the fire. The kettle sang again, familiar and comforting, as though the night's wonders had never happened at all. "Tea?" he asked. "Yes, please," she said, turning back to him. "And thank you." "For the tea," he teased gently. "For staying," she replied. He paused, meeting her gaze. "I think I was always going to." They ate together at the small table, sharing the quiet that settles between people who do not feel the need to fill it. Outside, someone laughed. A shovel scraped rhythmically against stone. Christmas morning, unfolding as it always had, and yet Elowen felt the subtle shift beneath it, like earth preparing for spring far too early. After breakfast, Jonah pulled on his coat. "I should help clear the lane," he said. "If I'm going to linger, I ought to earn my keep." Elowen smiled. "Careful, that's how it starts." He grinned back. "So I've heard." Left alone, she tidied the kitchen slowly, deliberately. She hung fresh herbs near the window, set the music box back on the shelf, and opened her grandmother's journal once more. This time, a page she hadn't noticed before caught her eye, one tucked near the back, its ink darker, more certain. "The hollow chose you because you listen," it read. "But listening is only the beginning." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of snow and wood smoke and something green beneath it all. Somewhere deep in the hollow, the old road shifted again, not opening, not closing, just making room. And above them, the stars sharpened, bright and attentive, as if eager to see what would be chosen next. Night settled again, slower this time, like it knew it was welcome. The last of the neighbors drifted home with leftovers wrapped in cloth and laughter still clinging to their coats. Elowen stood in the doorway long after the hollow had gone quiet, lantern raised, watching familiar figures become silhouettes and then memory. Snow began again, light, thoughtful flakes that seemed to choose where they landed. Jonah closed the door gently behind them. The cottage exhaled, warmth gathering itself back into the corners. "You host like someone who's been doing it for a very long time," he said. Elowen smiled, loosening her scarf. "I think the cottage does most of the work. I just try not to get in the way." They tidied together without speaking much, stacking plates, banking the fire, hanging damp mittens to dry. It felt domestic in a way that startled her, not because it was new, but because it felt so old, like a habit picked up again after a long pause. Later, they sat by the hearth once more, the music box open between them but silent now, its work done for the night. Jonah flipped through his notebook again, slower this time, studying what he'd drawn earlier as though it might change if he looked too hard. "Maps usually stop here," he said, tapping the edge of the page, "at the place you are." "And what's beyond?" Elowen asked. He glanced at her, eyes thoughtful. "That's the part I never knew how to draw." The fire shifted, sending a low rush of warmth through the room. Elowen felt the quiet thrum of the seed beneath the frozen ground outside, felt the listening hush of the hollow itself. She thought of her grandmother's journal, of the woman in the between-place kitchen, of doors that appeared only when you were ready to decide something. "Maybe," she said slowly, "beyond isn't a place. Maybe it's a way of paying attention." Jonah considered that, then nodded. "I could learn that." They spoke then of small things again. The way winter mornings smelled sharper than evenings, the particular creak of the third stair, the best time to tap maple trees when spring came. Jonah told her about a village by the sea where houses were painted blue to confuse storms. Elowen told him about the midsummer night when the orchard fox had brought her a shoe and left it by the door, offended when she didn't understand the gift. Laughter softened the edges of the room. At some point, Jonah grew quiet. He stared into the fire, jaw set not with worry but with intention. "If I stayed," he said finally, "it wouldn't be just for the winter." Elowen's breath caught, not sharply, but deeply, like she'd stepped into cold water and found it bracing rather than painful. "I wouldn't want you to stay out of obligation," she said. He turned to her. "I wouldn't." The silence that followed was rich, full of unsaid things resting comfortably between them. Outside, a branch cracked softly under the weight of snow. Somewhere far off, bells rang, not clearly, not insistently, but enough to be felt. Elowen rose and crossed to the window. Frost traced delicate maps across the glass, each one unique, each one temporary. She pressed her fingertips to the cold pane and smiled faintly. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll need to check the oak. The ground might shift." Jonah stood beside her, close but not crowding. "I'd like that." The candle on the mantel guttered low. Elowen moved to snuff it out, then paused, remembering the tradition. Instead, she replaced it with a fresh one, flame steady and bright. "For wanderers," Jonah said softly. "For anyone who needs to know they're welcome," Elowen replied. They prepared for sleep again, slower this time, reluctant to let the day end. When Elowen finally climbed into bed, she lay awake listening to the cottage settle, to Jonah's footsteps above her, to the quiet, listening presence of the hollow wrapped around them both. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt it again. That gentle, patient knock, not on wood or stone, but on the edge of what she knew. This time, she didn't rise to answer. She only smiled, hand resting over her heart, certain, absolutely certain, that whatever waited would not leave simply because she asked it to wait. And beneath the snow, the seed listened too, gathering itself. Not yet ready to break the earth, but already dreaming of light. Morning came again, gentler than before, as though it had learned the shape of the cottage and chosen to fit itself carefully inside. Elowen woke to the smell of bread, fresh this time, not yesterday's promise fulfilled, but something newly made. Yeast and warmth and patience braided together in the air. For a moment she lay still, disoriented in the best way, listening to the quiet clatter of pans and the low murmur of someone humming off-key but with conviction. She smiled into her pillow. When she emerged from her room, hair loose and sleep soft, she found Jonah at the counter, sleeves rolled, dusting flour from his hands like a man who had done this often enough to trust the process. "I hope that's all right," he said, glancing up. "I couldn't stop thinking about how you said traditions live only if you feed them." Elowen crossed the room and leaned against the door frame, warmth blooming behind her ribs. "It's more than all right." They shared breakfast in companionable ease, tearing bread instead of slicing it, letting butter melt where it pleased. Outside, the hollow moved at a slower pace than the day before, as if everyone had agreed to stretch Christmas just a little longer. Afterward, they bundled up and went out together. The snow lay smooth and unbroken where Elowen had planted the seed, but something had changed. The air above that spot felt different, alive in a way that made her pause mid-step. Jonah noticed immediately. "There," he said quietly. Elowen nodded. "It's listening." They didn't touch the ground, didn't disturb it. Some things, Elowen knew now, needed space more than tending. They stood together, breath rising in pale clouds until the moment felt complete. As they turned back toward the cottage, Jonah stopped. "I should tell you something," he said. She waited the way she always did, open, attentive, unhurried. "I've been running," he admitted. "Not from danger, from stillness. Every time I stayed somewhere long enough to feel rooted, I convinced myself it was time to move on." Elowen thought of the path, the gathering tree, the way the hollow had leaned in close when they stepped onto it. "And now?" "And now," he said, meeting her gaze, "I wonder what would happen if I stayed long enough to be changed by a place instead of just recording it." Her answer came easily. "Places like that tend to ask things of you." He smiled, a little crooked, a little hopeful. "I think I'm ready to be asked." The day unfolded in small, meaningful ways. They repaired a loose shutter. They walked the orchard and planned which branches would need pruning come spring. Jonah sketched as they went, not maps this time, but moments. The way frost caught on moss, the curve of Elowen's hands around a mug, the quiet dignity of the stubborn pear tree. As dusk approached, clouds rolled in low and heavy, promising more snow. Elowen lit the lanterns early. One by one, their glow stitched warmth back into the gathering dark. That evening, as the wind rose and the hollow tucked itself in once more, Elowen felt it again. Not the knock this time, but something like anticipation. As if the world had leaned forward slightly, waiting to see whether she would notice. She did. She always did. And somewhere between the crackle of the fire and the soft turning of pages in Jonah's notebook, something unseen shifted its weight, preparing. Not yet to arrive, but no longer content to remain only a possibility. The snow came in the night, deep and decisive, sealing the hollow into a world of white and quiet. When Elowen woke, the windows were bright with reflected light, as though the morning itself had learned how to smile. She dressed slowly, savoring the ordinary ritual, wool stockings, the blue dress patched at the elbow, her grandmother's cardigan with its mismatched buttons. The cottage felt different now. Not changed exactly, but answered, like a question finally understood. Jonah was already awake. He stood at the window, notebook forgotten on the sill, simply watching the snow-laden world breathe. "It feels," he said without turning, "like the moment after a story chooses its ending." Elowen joined him, shoulder to shoulder, or the moment before a new one begins. They went outside together, boots crunching through fresh drifts. The oak stood silent and strong, its branches bowed, and there, at its base, the snow had shifted. A single green shoot had broken through. Elowen dropped to her knees, breath leaving her in a soft, astonished laugh. "Already," she whispered. Jonah knelt beside her, eyes bright. It didn't wait for spring. No, she said, understanding settling into her bones. Some things don't. They didn't touch it. They only watched, hands brushing reverent. The bells rang then, clear, close, joyful, not summoning, celebrating. By midday, the hollow stirred. Neighbors arrived one by one, drawn not by announcement but by instinct. They noticed the chute. They felt the warmth beneath the cold. They stayed for tea and bread and quiet conversation that carried more weight than words. No one asked questions. They didn't need to. That evening, as lanterns bloomed again, and the sky deepened to velvet blue, Jonah closed his notebook and set it aside. "I don't think I'll finish this map," he said. Elowen looked at him, searching. "Do you regret that?" He smiled, sure and gentle. "No, I think I've found the place that doesn't need drawing." They stood together at the window, watching snow fall softly over the hollow, over the oak, over the paths, seen and unseen, that wove through it all. The cottage glowed behind them. The light stayed on. And in Bramblewick Hollow, where winter remembered how to be kind, the old road settled at last, not closed, not gone, but content, knowing it had led exactly where it was meant to.